Heat shimmered across the cracked earth as Sarah dragged another load of firewood toward her isolated cabin. Each step burned her calloused feet, but pride kept her moving. The town that once embraced her now turned blind eyes to her struggle after her husband's disgrace. She stumbled, knees hitting hard ground, wood scattering. No one rushed to help. No one except him, a weathered Apache standing motionless at the edge of her property. The outcast, the ghost, their eyes locked across the distance. His scarred hands, marked from years in the wilderness, extended toward her burden without a word. What could bring these two broken souls together in a land that had forgotten them both? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Blackwood twisted the gold band on her finger as she surveyed her meager garden. 3 years of marriage, 2 years alone. The wedding ring had grown loose as the Arizona territory had stripped away her softness, leaving behind sinew and determination. Dawn painted the modest cabin in amber light. 1 room, a stone fireplace, and furniture crafted by hands that once belonged to a doctor's wife, not a survivor. The bed where she slept alone sat in the corner, covered with a quilt her mother had made, a relic from another life. She kneeled beside the struggling tomato plants, fingers working the parched soil. Water was precious, rationed with the precision she once witnessed in her husband's medical practice. The irony wasn't lost on her that Charles had taught her to save lives while his actions had condemned hers. "You made your bed, Sarah?" she murmured, the sound of her voice strange in the morning stillness. No use crying over it now. 5 miles away, Tucson was waking. The same town that had once welcomed her with open arms now turned its back. The scandal had been spectacular by frontier standards, the trusted doctor embezzling from the town's medical fund, leaving families without care when fever swept through last winter. 3 children had died. Charles went to prison. Sarah became invisible. She brushed dirt from her calloused hands and reached for her empty water bucket. The well was running lower each day, another worry to add to her growing collection. Her gaze drifted to the hills where she'd seen him yesterday, the Apache who had helped her with the firewood. A ghost, they called him in town. Dangerous, unpredictable. Probably thinks the same about me, she said, managing a small smile. The townspeople's whispers followed her even here. The doctor's disgraced wife, too proud to leave, probably in on it all along. She'd stopped going to church after Mrs. Patterson had moved to another pew rather than sit beside her. The wedding band caught the sunlight. Sarah considered removing it, had considered it 100 times, but something always stopped her. It was a reminder of promises made and broken, but also of her own resilience. Charles had taken her dignity, her place in society, but he wouldn't take this land, the only thing she had left. Inside the cabin, she opened the small box where she kept her most precious possessions. Her mother's locket, her father's pocket watch, and the deed to this property. Beside them lay Charles's last letter, sent from prison 6 months ago. His elegant handwriting, once used to write prescriptions, now formed apologies she couldn't bring herself to believe. Sarah tucked the deed back into the box. Thomas, Charles's brother, had tried to convince her to sell after the trial. "A woman alone can't manage such a property," he'd said with practiced concern. When sympathy failed, he'd turned to veiled threats. She'd shown him the door with her father's shotgun. She prepared a simple breakfast of cornbread and coffee, eating at the small table by the window. From here, she could see the path to town, empty except for the occasional jackrabbit. No visitors came anymore. No friends, no family, just Thomas with his offers that grew less generous with each visit. The coffee was bitter, made from grounds she'd used twice already. Market day wasn't for another week, and her coins were carefully counted, each one representing hours of work mending clothes for the miners who didn't care about her husband's crimes as long as her stitches held firm. Sarah plaited her hair into a tight braid, securing it at the nape of her neck. She'd been beautiful once, or so Charles had told her. Now her skin was weathered, her hands rough, her eyes lined with the particular loneliness of being forgotten while still alive. She took a final look at the wedding band before heading outside to face another day. Whatever it had once promised was gone, but it remained a testament to her endurance. Like the desert around her, she had learned to survive with less than what others considered necessary. Kitchi watched the white woman from his perch among the red rocks. For 3 weeks he had observed her routine, her stubborn battle against the desert, her silent determination. His people would have called her Bahazogu, one who walks in beauty despite hardship. The settlers called him Ghost. He accepted this name as he accepted all things now, with the quiet resignation of a man who had lost his place in the world. He adjusted the small medicine pouch that hung from his neck, fingers tracing the intricate beadwork his grandmother had crafted for him when he became a healer. Before he became a scout, before the betrayal, the pouch contained herbs, stones, and memories, the last remnants of a life fractured by war and misplaced trust. "She works too hard," he murmured in his native tongue, watching the woman struggle with another load of firewood. Her feet were bare, her dress faded. Yet she moved with dignity, like a deer that knows it is watched but refuses to show fear. The townspeople avoided her. This Kitchi understood. Outcasts recognized each other, even across the distances of culture and language. He had seen how the men in town looked at her, with suspicion and something darker. The same looks cavalry officers had given him before everything changed. Kitchi descended from his vantage point, moving silently through the scrub brush. He wasn't sure why he had approached her yesterday. Perhaps it was the way she had fallen, the scattered with like broken promises around her. Perhaps it was the absence of self-pity in her eyes when she looked up at him. The sun hung low, painting the desert in gold and shadow. Kitchi followed a dry creek bed toward his simple camp, a small lean-to sheltered by a sandstone overhang. He had few possessions: a worn blanket, cooking implements, his bow and knife. The army had taught him English, how to track, how to exist between two worlds. None of these skills had protected him when accusations flew. "Kitchi," he said aloud, tasting his own name. Brave. His father had given him this name after he had survived fever as a child. The white soldiers had called him Kit, then traitor. Now he had no name at all among his people. At his camp, Kitchi built a small fire and prepared his evening meal: rabbit stewed with wild onions and the last of the cornmeal traded from a sympathetic Mexican farmer. As he ate, he considered the woman's homestead. Her well was running dry. He had seen the signs. The hidden spring in the hills could save her garden, her animals, perhaps her life. But such knowledge came with risk for both of them. Rumors in town painted him as dangerous, a rogue warrior. He had heard whispers when he traded for supplies at the Mexican trading post on the outskirts of Tucson. "That's him, the Apache Ghost. Killed his own people, they say. Served the bluecoats until he turned on them too. Can appear and disappear like morning mist." These stories served him. Fear kept people away, preserved his solitude. But they were built on the cracked foundation of half-truths. Yes, he had been the only survivor when his scouting party was ambushed. Yes, he had fled rather than face the army's swift justice when they accused him of leading his comrades into a trap. But the truth was buried with 7 soldiers in shallow graves near the Dragoon Mountains. Kitchi extinguished his fire and laid back, watching stars emerge from the darkening sky. Tomorrow the woman would haul water. Tomorrow her struggle would continue. Tomorrow perhaps he would help her again. He reached for his medicine pouch, opening it in the starlight. Among the sacred items lay a tarnished cavalry button, a reminder of Captain Reynolds, the one white man who had treated him as an equal. Reynolds had died first in the ambush, his blood staining Kitchi's hands as he tried to stem the wound. When the survivors staggered back to the fort, it was easier to blame the scout than to admit they had ignored his warnings about the narrow canyon. The woman had not flinched from his scarred hands yesterday. She had not called him savage or ghost. She had simply nodded, acknowledgement between equals in suffering. Morning would bring its own decisions. For now, Kitchi closed his eyes, the medicine pouch resting over his heart, its weight both burden and comfort. Sarah stared at the empty water barrel, her reflection distorted in the last inch of muddy liquid at the bottom. 2 months without rain had left the well dangerously low. She would need to go to town, a prospect she dreaded more than the thirst that parched her throat. She hitched her mule, Bessie, to the small wagon, loading the empty barrels alongside a basket of mended clothes to deliver. The coins she'd earn wouldn't buy much, but they'd buy enough. Sarah had redefined enough many times over the past 2 years. The journey into Tucson took over an hour, the sun climbing higher as Bessie plodded along the dusty road. Sarah had wrapped cloth around her feet, a concession to town propriety rather than comfort. Her thoughts drifted to the Apache who had helped her with the firewood. Twice more she had glimpsed him near her property, a shadow among shadows, there and then gone. The town appeared on the horizon, buildings shimmering in the heat. Sarah straightened her spine, adjusted her faded bonnet, and reminded herself that their opinions couldn't take anything more from her than had already been taken. Main Street was busy with the usual traffic. Miners, cowboys, proper ladies who found sudden interest in storefront windows as Sarah passed. She guided Bessie toward Henley's General Store, where a cluster of men loitered on the porch. "Well, look who's come to town," one of them called out. "The doctor's wife." Sarah ignored him, securing Bessie to the hitching post. The other men fell silent as she approached, their eyes following her ascent up the wooden steps. Inside, the store's relative coolness was a momentary relief. Mr. Henley stood behind the counter, his expression unchanging as Sarah placed her list before him. "Sugar's gone up," he said flatly. "Flour too. For everyone or just me?" Sarah asked, meeting his gaze. Henley had the decency to look away first. "There's a drought on. Prices rise. I'll take half of what's on the list." "Then," Sarah said, crossing items off with a stubby pencil. "And I need water. My well's running low." "Water's 5 cents a barrel now," Henley said. "Supply and demand. It had been 2 cents last month." Sarah bit her tongue and nodded. As Henley gathered her supplies, she placed her mended garments on the counter. "For the Miller family and Mrs. Peterson," she said. "Already paid for." Henley nodded, not meeting her eyes. The door opened, bringing with it a blast of hot air and Sheriff Garrett, his tall frame filling the doorway momentarily before he stepped inside, removing his hat. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said with a nod. "Good to see you." Unlike the others, Sheriff Garrett had never changed his treatment of Sarah after Charles's arrest. He had been fair during the trial, respectful of her position, and occasionally checked on her property during his rounds. "Sheriff," she acknowledged. "How's Mrs. Garrett's rheumatism?" "Better with that willow bark tea you suggested." He lowered his voice. "Thomas been bothering you lately?" "Not for a few weeks," Sarah replied, equally quiet. "Good. He's been drinking heavily since he lost that mining claim." The sheriff's weathered face showed genuine concern. "You need anything, you send word." Sarah nodded, grateful for the small kindness. She paid Henley, watching her precious coins disappear into his register. As she gathered her supplies, Mrs. Patterson entered the store, her young daughter in tow. "Mama, it's the doctor lady," the child said, pointing at Sarah. "Hush, Emily. Mrs. Blackwood isn't a doctor," Mrs. Patterson corrected sharply, pulling her daughter away as if Sarah's disgrace might be contagious. Outside, Sarah loaded her meager purchases and newly filled water barrels. The return journey stretched before her, heat radiating from the packed earth. Halfway home, dizziness overtook her. She stumbled from the wagon, seeking shade beneath a twisted mesquite tree. The world spun, dark spots dancing in her vision. When she opened her eyes, he was there, the Apache, kneeling beside her with a water skin in his outstretched hand. Without hesitation, Sarah accepted it, the lukewarm liquid the sweetest thing she had tasted in months. "Thank you," she managed once her throat had been soothed. He nodded once, dark eyes studying her face. Then, to her surprise, he spoke. "Water not good," he said, gesturing to her barrels. "I show better water." His English was accented but clear. Sarah looked at him properly for the first time. The weathered face, the quiet dignity in his posture, the small decorated pouch hanging at his neck. Not a ghost but a man. "I'm Sarah," she said. He seemed to consider this, then touched his chest lightly. "Kitchi." Dawn broke over Sarah's homestead, painting the weathered cabin in gentle light. For the 5th consecutive day, Kitchi appeared at the edge of her property, silent as morning mist. Their routine had developed without discussion. He would help with the heaviest tasks, she would nod her thanks, and he would disappear before noon. Today, Sarah waited on the porch, 2 tin cups beside her. When Kitchi approached, she lifted one in offering. "Coffee," she said. "It's not very good." Kitchi hesitated, then accepted the cup with careful hands. He sniffed it, his expression unreadable, before taking a small sip. "Too much water," he observed, but continued drinking. Sarah almost smiled. Some would say not enough coffee. They sat in companionable silence, the space between them filled with the desert's awakening sounds. Quail calling, insects humming, the distant howl of a coyote. Sarah studied him from the corner of her eye. His clothing was a mixture of Apache and white man's garments. The medicine pouch around his neck seemed to hold special significance, his fingers often drifting to it unconsciously. "Today I must fix roof," Kitchi said, breaking the silence. He pointed to the corner of the cabin where several shingles had come loose during the last windstorm. "You don't have to," Sarah replied. Kitchi looked at her directly. "Rain will come. Soon." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "The sheriff says the drought might last months yet." "Sheriff knows town. I know sky." His certainty left no room for argument. After finishing their coffee, Kitchi set to work on the roof while Sarah tended her garden. The morning passed in productive silence until Kitchi called down to her, holding something in his hand. "This is yours." It was a hand-carved wooden dipper, worn smooth with age and use. Sarah shaded her eyes to look up at him. "It was my father's. He made it for our well back in Missouri." Kitchi examined it with careful fingers before descending the ladder. He held it out to her, but didn't immediately release it when she grasped the handle. "Water is life," he said. "This is good tool for good water." Later, as they ate a simple lunch of cornbread and beans, Kitchi surprised her by asking, "Why stay? Town hates you." The bluntness startled a genuine laugh from Sarah. "That's direct." Kitchi shrugged. Words should not waste time. Sarah considered the question, rolling a bean between her fingers. "This land is mine. Legally. My husband." She paused. "Charles bought it before everything happened. It's all I have left." "Land belongs to no one," Kitchi replied. "People belong to land. That's not how the law sees it. White man's law." He gestured toward the distant hills. "Apache law different." A rattlesnake's distinctive warning interrupted their conversation. Sarah froze as she spotted the serpent coiled near her garden, its rattles vibrating ominously. Before she could react, Kitchi was on his feet, moving with fluid precision. In one smooth motion, he pinned the snake's head with a forked stick, then grasped it behind the head. Sarah watched, breathless, as he carried the rattler away from the cabin, releasing it at a safe distance. When he returned, she noticed a small, fresh cut on his hand. "You're hurt," she said, rising to fetch her small medical kit. Another relic from her life with Charles. "Small bite, not snake." Kitchi showed her where a sharp rock had sliced his palm. Sarah cleaned the wound with whiskey, her touch clinical but gentle. Kitchi watched her work without flinching. "You have healer hands," he observed. "I learned from my husband. He was a doctor." "Was?" Kitchi asked. Sarah's hands stilled momentarily. He's in prison. In Yuma." Kitchi absorbed this information without judgment. "For what crime?" "He stole money meant for medicines. People died because of it." The words still tasted bitter after all this time. "Yet you wear his ring." Kitchi nodded toward her wedding band. Sarah finished bandaging his hand. "Habit, maybe, or reminder." "Of what?" She met his gaze. "That people aren't always what they seem." Kitchi nodded slowly, understanding in his dark eyes. "This I know." He touched his medicine pouch. "I was scout for bluecoats. Trusted. Then blamed when soldiers died." The confession hung between them, a bridge of shared experience spanning their different worlds. "Tomorrow," Kitchi said, rising to leave, "I show you good water." He placed something on the porch rail, a newly carved wooden dipper, the handle smooth as river stone. "For good water," he said, and was gone before she could thank him. Sarah had postponed the trip to town as long as possible, but her supply of quinine bark had dwindled to nothing. With fever season approaching, she couldn't risk being without it. Kitchi had shown her the hidden spring as promised, saving her garden and providing clean drinking water, but medicine remained a necessity she couldn't harvest from the desert. As she approached Tucson, she noticed more horses than usual hitched outside the saloon. Market day. Sarah steeled herself for the increased scrutiny. The apothecary, Mr. Jenkins, was an elderly man who had always treated her with professional courtesy, if not warmth. His shop smelled of herbs and chemicals, glass bottles lining the walls in neat rows. A small bell announced her entry. "Mrs. Blackwood," Jenkins nodded. "The usual?" "Just the quinine this time," Sarah replied, placing exact coins on the counter. As Jenkins measured the bitter bark into a paper packet, the door opened. Thomas Blackwood filled the frame, his imposing figure a heavier version of Charles. The same sharp nose and blue eyes, but lacking Charles's veneer of education and charm. "Well," Thomas drawled, "if it isn't my favorite sister-in-law." Sarah tucked the quinine into her pocket. "Thomas." Jenkins busied himself with reorganizing bottles, clearly unwilling to be drawn into their exchange. "Heard you've taken up with an Apache," Thomas said, loud enough for Jenkins to hear. "Town's talking about nothing else. The doctor's wife gone native." Sarah moved toward the door, but Thomas blocked her path. What would poor Charles say if he knew his wife was consorting with savages? "I'm not consorting with anyone," Sarah replied evenly. "Please move." "That's not what Henley says. Claims he saw the Indian leaving your property at dawn." Thomas leaned closer, whiskey heavy on his breath. "Didn't take you long to replace my brother, did it?" Sarah met his gaze unflinchingly. "Mr. Henley should mind his business. As should you." Thomas's face darkened. "That land should have come to me when Charles went to prison. We both know it. Charles signed the deed to me, not you. The law is clear. Laws change, especially when a respectable widow finds herself in a compromising position." His implication hung in the air. Jenkins cleared his throat. "I need to close for lunch, folks." Outside, the sun momentarily blinded Sarah. She blinked, adjusting to the brightness, and found Sheriff Garrett approaching, the silver star on his chest catching the light. "Mrs. Blackwood," he greeted, then nodded stiffly to Thomas. "Blackwood." Thomas's demeanor changed instantly, a false smile replacing his sneer. "Sheriff, just catching up with family." "I'm sure," Garrett replied dryly. He turned to Sarah. "Mind if I walk you to your wagon?" Sarah accepted gratefully. Once out of Thomas's earshot, Garrett spoke quietly. "Be careful around him." He's been making accusations at the saloon, claiming you've got an Indian living with you. That's absurd, Sarah replied. I've hired help occasionally. A man has been hauling water and firewood. The Apache they call Ghost? Garrett raised an eyebrow. Sarah hesitated. His name is Kitchy. Listen, Sarah. Garrett's voice dropped further. I've got nothing against the man. Had some dealings with him when he scouted for the army. Seemed honorable enough. But these are dangerous times for any white woman associated with an Indian. I'm already a social outcast, Sheriff. What more can they do? Garrett's expression grew serious. Thomas is claiming the land should be his since Charles is in prison. Says he's concerned about your moral character. In these parts, that kind of talk can lead to committees of concerned citizens taking matters into their own hands. Sarah felt a chill despite the heat. Is that a warning, Sheriff? Consider it friendly advice. He adjusted his hat. The Apache Kitchy, he's had his own troubles. Army still considers him a deserter, though the charges were never proven. Together, you make an easy target for men like Thomas. At her wagon, Garrett handed Sarah up to the seat. One more thing. Charles is coming up for early release. Good behavior. He studied her face. Thomas knows. Probably why he's pressing his claim now. Sarah gripped the reins tightly. When? Month, maybe 2. Garrett touched the brim of his hat. Thought you should know. The ride home seemed longer than usual, the sheriff's news weighing heavily on her mind. Charles returning. The thought brought neither joy nor relief, only a hollow uncertainty. And Kitchy, what would happen to their fragile friendship? As the cabin came into view, she saw him waiting by the garden, a bundle of herbs in his hands. For the first time in years, Sarah had begun to feel less alone. Now everything would change again. Sarah was kneading dough when she heard it. A soft thud against her door followed by silence. She wiped flour-covered hands on her apron and peered through the window. Kitchy leaned against the doorframe, one hand pressed to his side, dark blood seeping between his fingers. My God, she whispered, rushing to open the door. He stumbled slightly as she guided him to a chair. Hunting, he managed, his breathing labored. Fell on rocks. Cut deep. Sarah quickly retrieved the small medical kit she kept beneath her bed. A leather case containing instruments, sutures, and medicines she had taken from Charles's office before his arrest. She had told herself it was practical, not theft. Now she was grateful for her foresight. I need to see it, she said, helping him remove his buckskin shirt. The wound ran 6 inches along his ribs, deep enough to need stitching. Sarah worked methodically, cleaning the area with whiskey. Kitchy watched her with feverish eyes but made no sound as the alcohol burned the raw flesh. This will hurt, Sarah warned, threading a curved needle. Kitchy nodded once. Not first stitches. As Sarah began suturing, her hands moved with surprising confidence. She had assisted Charles countless times but had performed the procedure alone only once, on a miner whose face had been split open in a bar fight. You have steady hands, Kitchy observed, his voice strained but controlled. My husband taught me well, Sarah replied, focusing on her task. Before everything happened, I assisted with surgeries. Charles said I had a natural talent. Husband is healer? Not just doctor. Sarah paused, considering the distinction. He was skilled with a knife and knew his medicines. Whether that makes him a healer. She tied off another stitch. 3 children died because he took money meant for vaccines. I don't think a true healer would do that. Kitchy was silent for a moment. My grandmother was medicine woman, said healing comes from here. He touched his chest with his free hand. Not just knowledge here. He tapped his temple. The intimacy of the moment wasn't lost on Sarah. Her hands on his bare skin, his blood on her fingers, the quiet exchange of their most private thoughts. It had been years since she had been this close to anyone. Your grandmother taught you? She asked, partly to distract him from the pain. Kitchi nodded. Until I left to scout for bluecoats. She said I betrayed healing path. His eyes grew distant. Maybe she was right. Sarah tied off the final stitch and applied a poultice of yarrow leaves that Kitchi had shown her how to prepare weeks earlier. Why did you become a scout? Thought I could protect my people by helping army find those who broke treaties. Bitterness edged his voice. Instead, I led soldiers who did not listen. 7 died in ambush I warned about. Commander blamed me. Sarah began bandaging his torso, her movements gentle but firm. That's why they call you Ghost? They think you're dead. To my tribe I am dead. To army, I am traitor. His eyes met hers. Only here, I am Kitchi. The fever set in that night. Sarah placed a damp cloth on Kitchi's forehead as he shivered beneath her quilt. She had insisted he take her bed while she settled into the rocking chair beside him. Throughout the night, she changed his dressings, spooned broth between his cracked lips, and listened as he drifted between English and Apache in his delirium. No Weeza I, the enemy comes, he murmured, his hand clutching at phantoms. Captain, canyon walls too high. Sarah soothed him as best she could, her hand covering his. You're safe, Kitchi. Rest now. Near dawn, his fever broke. Sarah, exhausted, had dozed in the chair, her hand still holding his. She woke to find him watching her, his eyes clear. You stayed, he said simply. Of course. She checked his wound, relieved to find no signs of infection. You would have done the same. Kitchi's hand moved to the medicine pouch at his neck, untying it carefully. From within, he removed a small smooth stone, its surface etched with a spiral pattern. Grandmother gave this, he said, placing it in Sarah's palm. For healing. Sarah felt the weight of the gift, not just the stone, but the trust it represented. I can't take this. Not taking. Sharing. His fingers closed hers around the stone. Like knowledge. Like water. In that moment, as morning light filtered through the cabin windows, Sarah realized something had fundamentally shifted between them. What had begun as reluctant cooperation had become something neither of them had expected to find in this harsh wilderness. Connection. Copper-colored clouds gathered on the horizon, towering and ominous. Sarah stood on her porch, watching the distant lightning illuminate the darkening sky. Beside her, Kitchi studied the approaching storm with narrowed eyes. Bad, he said simply. Very bad. Need to prepare. The wind had already picked up, carrying the scent of rain and electricity. 2 days after his injury, Kitchi moved with careful deliberation, but his strength had largely returned. Sarah had never seen a desert storm like the one brewing before them. In her 2 years here, rain had been scarce and gentle when it came. The garden? She asked, already moving toward her small plot of vegetables. Kitchi shook his head. Animals first, then cabin, garden last. They worked urgently, securing the chicken coop and leading Bessie into the lean-to beside the cabin. Sarah gathered her tools and anything that might become a projectile in high winds. Kitchi methodically checked the roof repairs he'd made, adding support to the chimney. Creek bed, he said, pointing to the dry wash that curved around the western edge of her property. Will fill fast. Flash flood. Sarah glanced at her garden, the tomatoes, beans, and squash she had nursed through the drought. My vegetables won't survive a flood. Can build small wall, Kitchi said. Divert water. They gathered rocks and packed dirt, creating a crude barrier that might channel the floodwaters away from the precious garden. The first fat raindrops began to fall as they finished, quickly becoming a deluge. Lightning split the sky directly overhead, followed immediately by a crash of thunder that Sarah felt in her bones. Inside, Kitchi shouted over the wind. They barely made it to the cabin when a tremendous crack rent the air. Sarah turned in time to see a massive bolt of lightning strike the old cottonwood tree at the edge of her property. The tree, already dead from drought, exploded in a shower of splinters and flame, quickly extinguished by the pounding rain. Inside, Sarah lit the oil lamp as darkness enveloped them. Water began seeping under the door despite their efforts. Together they placed towels and rags along the threshold, working in the dim light as the storm raged outside. In Apache stories, Kitchi said as they huddled near the stone fireplace, storms come when thunder beings walk the earth. Sarah wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, her clothes damp and clinging. What do these thunder beings want? To remind us we are small. Kitchi added another log to the fire. That nature gives life and takes away. A particularly violent gust rattled the windows. Sarah found herself moving closer to Kitchi, the shared warmth a comfort against the storm's fury. When I was a girl in Missouri, she said, my father would tell stories during storms to distract me from my fear. Tell me one, Kitchi said, his face softened by firelight. Sarah smiled at the memory. He told tales of a magnificent city beneath the Mississippi River, where catfish wore waistcoats and turtles were wise judges. This is true, Kitchi asked, amusement in his eyes. As true as thunder beings, Sarah replied, surprising herself with the gentle teasing. They fell into conversation as the storm continued its assault. Sarah spoke of her childhood in Missouri, her courtship with Charles, her dreams of starting a clinic where she could put her medical knowledge to use. Kitchi described his youth among his people, his grandmother's teachings, his disastrous time with the army. I was there, he said quietly, when they signed treaty at Camp Grant, translated words that were lies, watched my people give up freedom for promises already broken. Is that why you left your tribe? Shame? Kitchi stared into the flames. Left to become scout, to protect. After ambush, when soldiers died, commander said I led them to trap. Other scouts believed him. My own cousin said I betrayed them. But you didn't, Sarah stated with certainty. No. Warned them. Captain Reynolds listened. Others called me coward for saying Canyon was dangerous. He touched his side where the fresh wound was healing. When fighting started, Reynolds died first. Then others. I survived. To Army, that was proof. The wind howled like a wounded animal. A section of the roof creaked ominously, but held. We are both ghosts, Sarah murmured, living among memories of who we were. Ghosts can still feel, Kitchi said, his hand finding hers in the firelight. Still build, still heal. Outside, the storm began to wane, but within the small cabin, something new weathered the night. A fragile understanding between two souls cast adrift, finding unexpected harbor in each other's company. Morning revealed the storm's aftermath. Branches strewn across the yard, the lightning-struck cottonwood now a blackened skeleton against the blue sky. Sarah's crude diversion wall had partially collapsed, but it had done its job. Her garden remained intact, though muddy. Kitchi appeared as she assessed the damage, carrying a rolled piece of hide. Good day to see spring, he said without preamble. Path clear after rain. Sarah hesitated, glancing at the work waiting to be done. I should clean up here first. Spring more important. Kitchi unrolled the hide, revealing a crude map drawn with charcoal. Will help with garden. Better than well water. Curiosity overcame practicality. Sarah had wondered about this hidden water source since he first mentioned it. How far? 1 hour walking. Bring water skin. They set out as the morning mist still clung to the desert floor. Kitchi led her along game trails invisible to her untrained eye, occasionally pausing to point out plants she had never noticed. A tiny cactus with medicinal properties, bitter berries that could quench thirst, roots that held water. You see desert as empty, he observed as they climbed a rocky slope. I see living place. The terrain grew steeper, the rocks redder as they entered a narrow canyon. Kitchi moved with the easy grace of one who had traveled this path countless times. Sarah followed, her legs aching but her curiosity pushing her forward. "Who knows about this place?" she asked during a brief rest. "My people once. Now only me." Kitchi helped her over a difficult passage. "And you?" The significance wasn't lost on Sarah. This wasn't merely a guide showing a water source. This was Kitchi sharing something precious, something that had kept him alive. The canyon narrowed further before suddenly opening into a small, hidden valley. Sarah gasped at the unexpected green nestled among the red rocks. At the far end, water seeped from the rock face into a clear pool fringed with ferns and wildflowers. "It's beautiful," she whispered, the word inadequate for the oasis before her. Kitchi gestured for her to approach the pool. "Taste." Sarah cupped her hands and drank. The water was cool and sweet, unlike the mineral-heavy well water she was accustomed to. "It's perfect. Underground river," Kitchi explained. "Flows even in drought." He showed her where he had created a small dam of stones and how he channeled water to irrigate a tiny garden of his own. Wild onions, medicinal herbs, and plants she didn't recognize. "Could bring water to your garden," he said. "Build clay pipes. Work hard, but worth effort." Sarah tried to imagine it, a reliable water source that wouldn't run dry, that wouldn't require trips to town or rationing. "Why show me this now?" Kitchi was silent for a moment, arranging stones along his miniature irrigation system. "Sheriff told you. Husband returns soon." So that was it. Sarah sat on a sun-warmed boulder, suddenly understanding. "You're giving me a way to survive without you." He didn't deny it. White man returns to white woman. Way of things. Charles and I. Sarah struggled to articulate the complexity. "It's not that simple. Simple is good water. Rest is human trouble." Kitchi sat beside her, not touching but close enough that she felt his presence like warmth from a fire. "Wanted you to have this, no matter what comes." From a pouch at his waist, he produced strips of dried meat and a handful of piñon nuts. They shared this simple meal in the dappled shade, listening to the gentle music of water on stone. "In my tribe," Kitchi said eventually, "showing sacred places means trust, not done lightly." Sarah felt the weight of his words. "I'm honored." "Should be." A rare smile briefly transformed his weathered face. "Took me 2 weeks to decide." They laughed together, the sound echoing softly against the canyon walls. In that moment, Sarah realized she hadn't laughed, truly laughed, since before Charles's arrest. As they prepared to return, Kitchi handed her a folded piece of hide, the map he had shown her earlier. "To find way back," he said simply. Sarah studied the charcoal lines, committing them to memory even as she accepted the gift. "Will you still come? After Charles returns?" Kitchi's expression grew solemn. "Not my decision alone." The journey back was mostly silent, each lost in thought about what Charles's return would mean. As they approached the homestead, the sun beginning its descent, Kitchi stopped at the edge of her property. "I go now," he said. "Return tomorrow to fix storm damage." But for the first time since they had begun working together, he lingered, as if reluctant to leave. Sarah felt the same unspoken resistance. "Thank you," she said finally, "for the spring, for everything." Kitchi nodded once, his eyes holding hers a moment longer than necessary. Then he was gone, disappearing into the lengthening shadows. That night, Sarah studied the map by lamplight, her finger tracing the path to the hidden spring, wondering if it might also be a path to a future she had never imagined. Sheriff Garrett's arrival was unexpected. Sarah saw the dust from his horse long before he reached her property. Kitchi, who had been helping repair the chicken coop damaged in the storm, melted away into the brush without a word, a habit born of necessary caution. "Mrs. Blackwood?" Garrett called, dismounting with the stiffness of a man who'd spent too many hours in the saddle. "Sheriff," Sarah greeted, wiping her hands on her apron. "Is something wrong?" "Nothing wrong." He removed his hat, revealing a damp brow despite the early hour. Brought something for you. From his saddlebag, he withdrew an envelope, slightly crumpled from the journey. Sarah recognized the precise handwriting immediately. Charles. Came in with the prison dispatch, Garrett explained. Thought you'd want it straight away. Sarah accepted the letter, its weight seeming disproportionate to the thin paper. Thank you. Garrett cleared his throat. There's talk in town about your Apache friend. Is that official business, Sheriff? Sarah kept her tone neutral. Just concerned. Thomas has been stirring trouble, saying you've abandoned civilized ways. He replaced his hat. I'm not here to judge, Sarah, but others will. After declining her offer of coffee, Garrett departed with a final warning. Letter confirms what I told you. Charles gets out in 3 weeks. Parole board was impressed with his reformation. Sarah watched him ride away, the unopened letter burning in her hand. She waited until she was certain he was gone before calling softly. He's gone. Kitchi emerged from the mesquite thicket, his expression guarded. Letter from husband? Sarah nodded, breaking the seal with reluctant fingers. They sat together on the porch steps as she read silently, the pages rustling in the morning breeze. My dearest Sarah, the parole board has granted my early release for good behavior. I cannot express my gratitude for your steadfast loyalty during these darkest years of my life. Your letters, though few, have sustained me. I have had ample time to reflect on my grievous errors and the pain I caused not only the town but you, my faithful wife. I am a changed man, Sarah. The prison chaplain has guided me to true repentance, and I have dedicated my remaining days to making amends. I know I can never fully atone for the lives lost due to my greed, but I must try. I will return to you on the 17th of next month. Together we can rebuild our life and perhaps, in time, my reputation. I have ideas for the land, improvements that might restore our standing in the community. Your devoted husband, Charles. Sarah folded the letter carefully, her face revealing nothing of its contents. 3 weeks, she said finally. He'll be here in 3 weeks. Kitchi remained silent, his eyes on the distant mountains. The unspoken question hung between them. He says he's changed, Sarah continued, more to herself than to Kitchi. Found religion in prison. You believe? Kitchi asked simply. Sarah turned the letter over in her hands. I don't know. The Charles the First married was kind, brilliant, a healer. Then something changed. Money became more important than his oath to do no harm. People change. Sometimes back to themselves, sometimes not. Sarah stood abruptly, needing movement. He's still my husband. Yes. Kitchi's voice held no judgment, only acknowledgement of fact. I took vows, for better or worse. Sarah paced the small porch. This was the worst part. Vows important to your people, Kitchi observed. To mine also. Different words, same meaning. But vows go both ways. Sarah stopped pacing. What do you mean? He broke promise to heal, to protect. Kitchi gestured toward town. Children died. The blunt assessment struck Sarah like a physical blow. Kitchi spoke aloud what she had only allowed herself to think in the darkest hours of night. What would you do? She asked. If you were me? Kitchi shook his head. Cannot say. Not my path to walk. He rose, gathering his tools. But remember spring. Water always there, even if hidden. Sarah understood his meaning. He was offering her a choice, an alternative to the path duty seemed to demand. Will you still come? She asked. After he returns? Not wise, Kitchi replied. Man returns from prison to find Indian at his home. He left the consequence unspoken. That evening, after Kitchi had gone, Sarah sat alone with the letter, reading it again by lamplight. The familiar handwriting brought memories flooding back. Charles teaching her to suture a wound. Their wedding day, the respect in patients' eyes when they called her the doctor's wife. Then later memories, the trial, Charles's hollow excuses, the grieving parents whose children might have been saved if vaccines had been purchased instead of embezzled. 3 weeks. 21 days to decide whether duty and vows outweighed the quiet truth that had been growing in her heart, that in the company of a silent Apache, she had found something she had never truly had with Charles: understanding. The sound of approaching horses pulled Sarah from her gardening. 3 riders approached, Thomas Blackwood at the lead, flanked by 2 men she recognized from the saloon. Her stomach tightened as she straightened, brushing soil from her hands. Kitchi had left an hour earlier to hunt. Small mercies. Sister-in-law, Thomas called with false joviality as he dismounted. Fine day for a family visit. Sarah remained by her garden, the hoe still in her hand. Thomas, this isn't a good time. Nonsense. Always time for family. He gestured to his companions. You remember Mr. Decker and Mr. Hayes? From town. The men nodded without dismounting, their expressions unreadable beneath dust-covered hats. Sarah had seen their type before, men who did unpleasant work for those willing to pay. Thomas approached alone, stopping at the edge of her garden. Quite the little paradise you've carved out here. Remarkable for a woman alone. His emphasis on the word alone left little doubt about his meaning. What do you want, Thomas? Just a friendly conversation about the future. He removed his hat, revealing hair slicked with pomade. Charles will be home soon. Fresh start and all that. Charles and I will manage our own affairs. Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. Thing is, Charles and I have already discussed the situation. Been corresponding for months. Sarah concealed her surprise. Charles had never mentioned writing to his brother. He's not fit for this kind of labor after prison, Thomas continued. Doctors' hands aren't made for farming. Then it's fortunate I've managed without him. Thomas's expression hardened. Let's be plain. This land should have come to me when Charles went to prison. He borrowed family money to buy it. My money. The deed is in my name, Thomas. Legally and properly registered. Papers can be changed. Thomas produced a folded document from his coat. I've drawn up a fair offer. More than fair, considering. Considering what? Considering your reputation. Thomas glanced meaningfully toward the hills where Kitchi had disappeared. Word travels in small towns, Sarah. About women who take up with savages. Sarah's grip tightened on the hoe. I haven't taken up with anyone. Hayes there says different. Says he saw the Apache leaving at dawn last week. Thomas shrugged. Imagine Charles's heartbreak. Returning to find his loyal wife has been entertaining an Indian. Get off my property. It won't be yours much longer. Thomas's pretense of civility evaporated. Sign now and I'll ensure your indiscretions remain private. Charles need never know how his wife occupied herself while he served his time. Sarah stepped forward, meeting his gaze directly. I know what this is really about, Thomas. You've never worked a day in your life. You gambled away your inheritance. And now you're desperate. Thomas's face flushed. You ungrateful. I've refused your offers before. My answer remains no. His hand shot out, grasping her wrist with bruising force. You think you can speak to me that way? A disgraced doctor's whore? From the corner of her eye, Sarah caught movement in the brush. A flash of buckskin, the hint of a familiar silhouette. Kitchi watching silently. Remove your hand, she said calmly, despite her racing heart. Or what? Thomas sneered. You'll set your savage on me? Where is he, anyway? Hiding like the coward his kind always. Sarah swung the hoe, not aiming to strike but to startle. Thomas released her, stumbling backward. Next time, she said, her voice steady. I won't miss. Thomas straightened his coat, his eyes cold with fury. You've made a serious mistake. The only mistake I made was believing you had any honor. Sarah held the hoe ready, creating distance between them. Thomas backed toward his horse. This isn't over. When Charles returns, we'll settle matters properly. My husband may be many things, Sarah replied, but he's never been your puppet. Thomas mounted his horse, his companions shifting uneasily at the tension. 1 week, Sarah. Reconsider my offer before things get unpleasant. After they departed, Sarah sank to her knees in the garden, her hands trembling with delayed reaction. Kitchi emerged from his hiding place, moving silently to her side. You heard? She asked. Yes. He examined her wrist where Thomas's grip had left angry red marks. He will return. With more men. I know. Sarah looked toward the cabin where the deed to her property lay hidden in its metal box. He wants this land badly enough to threaten me. But why? It's not particularly fertile. The well runs low in summer. Kitchi's expression was thoughtful. Men like him do not value land for growing. They value what lies beneath. Beneath? Sarah looked at the ground with new eyes. You think there's something here? Minerals? Gold? Cannot say. But his hunger is too great for simple farmland. Sarah rose, brushing dirt from her skirt. Whatever his reason, I won't be bullied off my property. Kitchi nodded once, his decision made. Then we prepare. For what? For when he returns. Kitchi's eyes scanned the property, assessing vulnerabilities. With more men, and fewer words. Together they walked toward the cabin, both aware that Thomas's threat had changed everything. Not just for the land, but for their fragile connection that now faced threats from all sides. Dawn found Sarah and Kitchi surveying the homestead with new eyes, not as a home, but as ground to be defended. The open approach from the road, once welcoming, now seemed dangerously exposed. The well, essential for survival, sat vulnerably in the open yard. We start here, Kitchi said, indicating the cabin's 2 windows. Need shutters. Strong wood. Sarah nodded mentally, cataloging supplies. I have lumber saved for repairing the chicken coop. For 3 days they worked methodically. Kitchi fashioned sturdy shutters while Sarah gathered provisions that could sustain them if movement outside became dangerous. They dug a shallow trench from the well to the cabin, a way to access water while remaining sheltered. On the 4th morning, Kitchi arrived carrying something wrapped in buckskin. He unwrapped it carefully on the porch, revealing a beautifully crafted bow and a quiver of arrows. You know how to shoot? He asked. Sarah shook her head. My father had a rifle. Charles never approved of firearms. Kitchi held out the bow. Easier to learn than gun. Quieter too. He positioned her hands on the weapon, adjusting her stance with gentle pressure on her shoulders and elbows. The bow felt alien in her hands, a tool of violence so at odds with her healer's nature. I don't know if I could use this against a person, she admitted. Kitchi stepped back, studying her. Hope you never need to, but better to know how. Throughout the day he taught her the basics, how to nock an arrow, how to draw the string, how to aim at the crude target they'd fashioned from straw and canvas. By sunset, her arms ached, but she could hit the target consistently from 20 paces. Not bad, Kitchi acknowledged, the closest he came to outright praise. Tomorrow, moving targets. As they sat on the porch that evening, sharing a simple meal of rabbit stew, Sarah broke their comfortable silence. This isn't your fight. You know that, don't you? Kitchi considered her words, stirring his stew thoughtfully. When I was boy, grandmother told story of 2 wolves fighting in every person's heart. One wolf is anger, fear, greed. Other is peace, love, truth. He met her eyes. Wolf that wins is wolf you feed. And which wolf are we feeding now? Preparing for violence. Preparing to protect, he corrected. Different thing. Sarah wasn't convinced. Thomas will bring men with guns. We have a bow, a shotgun with limited ammunition, and whatever skill you possess. It doesn't seem... rational. Not about winning fight, about making fight too costly. Kitchy set aside his empty bowl. Men like Thomas want easy victory. We make victory hard, expensive. His logic made sense, but Sarah still struggled with the moral implications. I've spent my life trying to heal people, not harm them. Protecting life also sacred work. Kitchy touched the medicine pouch at his neck. My grandmother was healer, but she knew sometimes must fight disease aggressively to save patient. The comparison gave Sarah pause. She had assisted Charles in amputations, causing terrible pain and damage to save the whole patient. Perhaps this situation wasn't so different. I should write to Sheriff Garrett, she decided. Let him know what's happening. Kitchy nodded agreement. Good. Law on your side, even if Sheriff not always able to help. That night, Sarah composed a careful letter detailing Thomas's threats and her fears of escalation. She sealed it, planning to send it with the weekly mail rider who would pass on the main road tomorrow. As she prepared for bed, she noticed Kitchy hadn't left as he usually did at nightfall. Instead, he was arranging his blanket on the porch. You're staying? She asked through the open door. Until danger passes. His tone made it clear this wasn't negotiable. The implications of his decision weren't lost on Sarah. If anyone from town saw him sleeping at her property, whatever remained of her reputation would be destroyed. Yet the comfort of his presence outweighed the risk. At least come inside, she offered. It gets cold at night. Kitchy shook his head. Better I stay outside. See them coming. Sarah didn't argue further. She understood his reasoning was practical, not born of propriety. Still, she left the door unlatched, a silent invitation should he change his mind. Before sleep claimed her, Sarah found herself touching the healing stone Kitchy had given her, now hanging alongside her mother's locket on a leather cord around her neck. The cool smoothness of it brought comfort as her thoughts churned with worry about what Thomas might do next, about Charles's impending return, and about the quiet Apache warrior who had become so essential to her world. Outside, Kitchy kept his vigil, bow across his lap, eyes scanning the moonlit desert for any sign of approach, guarding not just the homestead but the woman whose strength had earned his respect, and whose gentle hands had begun to heal wounds deeper than any physical injury. Sarah recognized Sheriff Garrett's horse first, then the unfamiliar figure beside him. They were still a quarter-mile away, but she knew instantly Charles had returned. He's here, she said softly. Kitchy, who had been repairing a loose board on the porch, nodded once. I go now. Sarah wanted to object, to ask him to stay, but they both understood the impossibility of that. Will you come back? When safe? His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. Tomorrow, check spring. Then he was gone, slipping away into the mesquite thicket with the silent efficiency that had earned him the name Ghost. Sarah straightened her faded dress, touched her hair self-consciously, and steeled herself for the reunion. Sheriff Garrett raised his hand in greeting as they approached. Beside him, Charles sat stiffly on a borrowed horse, his once robust frame now gaunt, his formerly smooth hands roughened by prison labor. The hat he wore, his doctor's hat that Sarah had always associated with his authority and competence, now seemed oversized on his diminished frame. Mrs. Blackwood, the sheriff called. Special delivery. Charles dismounted awkwardly, his movements those of a man unaccustomed to horses. Sarah remained on the porch, one hand gripping the railing for support. The husband who approached was simultaneously familiar and a stranger. The same features arranged in a face marked by new lines, the same blue eyes now shadowed with experiences she couldn't fathom. Sarah, he said, his voice cracking slightly, you look well. Charles. She managed to keep her voice steady. Welcome home. The formality between them hung awkwardly in the desert air. Sheriff Garrett cleared his throat. I'll leave you folks to get reacquainted. Charles, remember what we discussed about your parole conditions? After the sheriff departed, Sarah and Charles stood regarding each other like cautious animals, uncertain of territory and boundaries. "You've kept the place up," Charles finally said, glancing around at the garden, the repaired roof, the new shutters. "Better than I expected, truthfully." "I've managed," Sarah replied, unsure whether to feel insulted or praised. Charles removed his hat, revealing hair gone prematurely gray. "May I come in? It's been a long journey from Yuma." Inside the cabin, Charles stood, motionless, absorbing the changes to what had once been their shared home. Sarah had rearranged furniture, added shelves, created a new workspace for her sewing and mending. The space reflected her solitary life, practical, efficient, with small touches of beauty where circumstances allowed. "Coffee?" she offered, falling back on the rituals of hospitality. "Please." Charles sat at the table, his hat resting beside him. Prison coffee was not coffee. As Sarah prepared the pot, Charles studied her movements. "You've changed, Sarah. 3 years will do that." "I meant it as a compliment." Charles rubbed his hands together, a nervous gesture she remembered from their courting days. "You seem stronger." Sarah placed the coffee before him. "Necessity." They sipped in silence until Charles spoke again. "I have plans, Sarah. Ideas for our future. The chaplain helped me see that I can still use my medical knowledge, even if I can never practice again." "What kind of plans?" "A book. A medical guide for frontier families without access to doctors." His eyes brightened with genuine enthusiasm. "Simple treatments, preventative measures, when to seek proper medical help. Could save lives, Sarah. Make amends in some small way." The idea was sound, even admirable. Sarah could see its merit. Yet something felt wrong. Charles speaking of their future, making plans that included her, assuming their life together would simply resume. "Thomas came here," she said, changing the subject, "with threats." Charles's expression darkened. "Thomas was always reckless. What did he want?" "The land. He claims you borrowed family money to buy it." "That's absurd. The property was purchased with my earnings." Charles frowned. "What kind of threats?" Sarah hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. "He said he'd return with men. That I should sell to him before you came home." "Did he say why he wants it so badly?" "No, but Kitchy." Sarah stopped, realizing her mistake too late. Charles's eyebrows rose. "Kitchy? A local man. Apache. He's helped with heavy work around the property." Sarah kept her tone matter-of-fact. "He suggested Thomas might believe there's something valuable beneath the land." Charles studied her face carefully. "You've had an Indian working here?" "Regularly. I couldn't have managed otherwise. The town must have been scandalized." Charles shook his head. "Though I'm hardly in a position to judge anyone's choices." An unexpected touch of the old Charles, the reasonable, thoughtful man she had married, peeked through his prison-hardened exterior. "Where will you sleep?" Sarah asked, the practical question masking the deeper one neither was ready to address. Charles glanced toward the bed. Their bed once, now hers alone for so long. The porch would be fine. For now. The unspoken agreement that their marriage, like Charles himself, needed time to heal before resuming its former intimacy, hung between them. "I'll prepare a pallet," Sarah said, relief mingling with confusion in her chest. That night, with Charles sleeping on the porch where Kitchy had kept watch just yesterday, Sarah lay awake, her thoughts in turmoil. Her husband had returned, apparently reformed, with honorable intentions. Her duty was clear, yet her hand kept straying to the healing stone at her throat, and her mind to the hidden spring where Kitchy had asked her to meet him tomorrow. Moonlight silvered the landscape as Sarah lay sleepless, listening to the night sounds of the desert. A coyote called in the distance. The wind whispered through mesquite branches. And from the porch came the low murmur of voices. Charles and an unexpected visitor. Sarah slipped from bed, careful to avoid the creaking floorboard near the window. She eased closer to the door, left slightly ajar to catch the night breeze. "You weren't supposed to come here," Charles was saying, his voice tense but hushed. "We agreed to meet in town tomorrow. Plans change, brother." Thomas's voice was unmistakable. The assayer confirmed it. The sample was rich, richer than we thought. Sarah froze. Through the narrow opening, she could see them. Charles seated on his pallet, Thomas looming over him, a folded paper in his hands. "Keep your voice down," Charles hissed. "She might hear." Thomas snorted. "Still worried about your wife's delicate sensibilities? After what she's been up to with that Apache. That's different. She needed help with the property. And I need this land." Thomas unfolded the paper, a document covered with official-looking script. "Everything's ready. She just needs to sign." Charles took the document, holding it up to catch the moonlight. "A forged deed transfer? Are you insane? It's not forged. It's perfectly legal once she signs it." Thomas's voice hardened. "And she will sign it, Charles. One way or another. I told you I'd handle this. Gently. She's my wife. And you've been gone 3 years." Thomas paced the small porch. "While you were breaking rocks in Yuma, I've been building this opportunity. Do you have any idea what silver prices are doing? This vein could make us wealthy men." "Silver." Sarah's hand went to her mouth, stifling a gasp. The pieces suddenly aligned. Thomas's persistent interest in the property, his escalating threats, his urgency. "I know exactly what silver prices are doing," Charles replied. "I've had the same newspapers you have. But forcing Sarah off her land wasn't our agreement." Thomas stopped pacing. "Our agreement was that you'd convince her to sell to me. Reasonable price, clean transaction. But your devoted wife seems remarkably attached to this worthless patch of dirt. It's her home. Our home. It's a fortune waiting to be dug up." Thomas slammed his hand against the porch rail, then immediately lowered his voice. "I've already formed a partnership with investors in Tucson. They've fronted money for equipment, workers. Everything's ready except for one detail: legal ownership." Charles was silent for a long moment. How much would her share be, if she agreed? The question sent a chill through Sarah. Not if the silver existed, not if Thomas's claims were legitimate, but what her share would be. Charles wasn't defending her. He was negotiating. 10%, Thomas offered. "More than fair considering she's contributed nothing." 15, Charles countered. "And I want it in writing." Sarah backed away from the door, her heart pounding. The Charles who had returned from prison wasn't reformed. He was simply playing a new role in an old scheme. The medical guide, the talk of making amends, all falsehoods designed to manipulate her into signing away her land. "What about the Apache?" Thomas was asking. "Hayes says he's dangerous. Military training." "Leave him to me," Charles replied. "Once Sarah signs the transfer, he'll have no reason to interfere. And if he does, then we handle him. Permanently." Sarah fumbled in the darkness for her shawl, wrapping it around her shoulders with trembling hands. She needed to think, to plan. The metal box containing the original deed lay hidden beneath a loose floorboard under her bed. They couldn't force her to sign anything if they couldn't find her. But where could she go? The town had turned against her. Her only ally was the very man Charles and Thomas now discussed eliminating. Sarah moved to the chest where she kept her few personal possessions. Quickly, silently, she gathered essentials. A change of clothes, the healing stone from Kitchi, her mother's locket, a small pouch of coins saved from her mending work. She tucked Charles's letter from prison among them, evidence of his deception. On the porch, the brothers' conversation continued, their voices now too low to distinguish individual words. Sarah slipped on her boots, her mind racing through options. She couldn't leave through the door without being seen. The window on the opposite side of the cabin would have to do. As she eased the window open, the ancient hinges protested with a betraying squeak. The voices on the porch fell silent. "Sarah," Charles called. "Are you awake?" Her answer was the soft thud of her feet hitting the ground outside the window, followed by the sound of running footsteps disappearing into the desert night. Sarah hadn't gone far when the first light of dawn revealed her pursuers. Charles and Thomas, mounted on horseback, followed her trail with uncomfortable ease. Her plan to reach the hidden spring, to find Kitchi, was unraveling with each passing minute. "Sarah," Charles's voice carried across the desert. "Stop this foolishness. We need to talk." She ducked behind a large saguaro, heart pounding. The horses were gaining ground quickly. With no other options, she stepped into the open, facing the approaching brothers with as much dignity as she could muster. Charles reached her first, dismounting awkwardly. His prison-pale face was flushed with exertion and anger. "What were you thinking, running off like that?" "I was thinking my husband and his brother were plotting to steal my land," Sarah replied evenly. Charles's expression faltered. Thomas rode up beside him, his face a mask of calculated concern. "Sarah, you're confused," Thomas said smoothly. "You must have misheard." "Silver," Sarah interrupted. "That's what this is about, isn't it? You found silver on my property." The brothers exchanged glances. Thomas dismounted, producing a small leather pouch from his coat pocket. He emptied its contents into his palm, a chunk of gray-white rock streaked with metallic threads that caught the morning light. "This was found in the dry creek bed after the storm," Thomas explained. "High-grade silver ore. The assayer in Tucson confirmed it. There's a vein running through your property worth thousands, maybe tens of thousands. And instead of telling me, you conspired to take it from me." Sarah's voice remained steady despite her racing heart. "We were going to offer you fair compensation," Charles interjected. 15%, Sarah countered. "I heard everything, Charles. Every word." Charles had the decency to look ashamed, but Thomas merely shrugged. "Business is business, Sarah. A woman alone can't develop a mining operation. I wouldn't be alone if your brother hadn't stolen from the town and left me to face the consequences." Charles flinched. "That's not fair, Sarah. I've paid for my mistake. And now you're making another one." She gestured toward the silver ore in Thomas's hand. "Did it occur to either of you that I might have willingly partnered with you if you'd approached me honestly?" Thomas snorted. "A woman with no experience, no capital, and a reputation for consorting with savages? What kind of partner would that make?" "The legal owner of the land you need," Sarah replied coldly. "The land you will never have." Thomas's face darkened. "Don't be foolish. You're outnumbered and outmatched." As if to emphasize his point, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Hayes and Decker appeared over the ridge, along with two other men Sarah didn't recognize. One led an extra horse. "Perfect timing," Thomas called to them. "Mrs. Blackwood is ready to return home and discuss business properly." Hayes dismounted, leading the spare horse forward. "The document ready for her to sign?" "Get back on your horses and leave," Sarah ordered, backing away. "All of you. This is my property, and you're trespassing." Thomas nodded to Hayes, who moved toward Sarah with deliberate slowness. "The easy way or the hard way, Sarah? Your choice." "Don't touch her," Charles snapped, surprising everyone. "She's still my wife." Thomas rounded on his brother. "Are you losing your nerve now, after everything we've planned?" "Not like this," Charles insisted. "There are lines, Thomas." "Lines?" Thomas laughed bitterly. "You crossed every line when you stole that medical fund. Don't pretend at morality now." While the brothers argued, Hayes continued his approach toward Sarah. She retreated until her back pressed against the rough trunk of a saguaro. "Come along quietly, ma'am," Hayes said, reaching for her arm. Sarah ducked under his grasp, but found her escape blocked by Decker. The men closed in, forming a tight circle around her. "I won't sign anything," she declared, her voice stronger than she felt. "You will," Thomas assured her, producing the forged document from inside his coat. "One way or another." Charles stood apart, conflict evident on his face but making no move to intervene. His earlier protest had been brief, easily overcome by Thomas's reminder of his own past crimes. "The Apache won't help you," Thomas continued. "We left men watching your cabin. If he shows his face, he'll be shot as a trespasser." Fear gripped Sarah's heart. Kitchi would come looking for her at the spring, unaware of the trap. "What do you want from me?" she asked, playing for time. Thomas gestured to the document. "Your signature transferring ownership to me. In return, you'll receive 15% of all profits from the silver mine, as negotiated with my brother." "And if I refuse?" Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then we'll escort you to town, where you'll explain to Sheriff Garrett how you've been harboring a renegade Apache wanted by the army. I imagine that would result in a rather thorough search of your property, including under it." Sarah looked from Thomas to Charles, searching for any sign of the man she had once loved. She found only a stranger's face, lined with prison hardship and focused on self-preservation. "Take me back to the cabin," she said finally. "I'll need a pen." Dusk painted the desert in purple shadows as Sarah was escorted back to her cabin. Hayes and Decker flanked her closely, while Thomas and Charles rode ahead, their hushed conversation occasionally breaking into heated whispers. The other men remained behind, presumably to watch for Kitchi. At the cabin, Thomas spread the forged document on the table. "Sign here," he instructed, indicating the bottom of the page. "And here." Sarah moved toward her bedroom. "I need a moment to compose myself." "Leave the door open," Thomas ordered suspiciously. Inside, Sarah knelt beside her bed, quickly prying up the loose floorboard to retrieve the metal box containing her original deed. She slipped it into her pocket, then approached the small window that faced away from the main room. The men's attention was focused on the document, giving her a slim chance. With practiced silence born from years of moving quietly around sleeping patients, Sarah eased the window open and slipped through. The moment her feet touched earth, she ran, not toward the road where they would expect, but toward the creek bed, the path to Kitchi's spring. Behind her, she heard Thomas's shout of discovery, followed by the scramble of pursuit. She had perhaps 2 minutes before they mounted their horses. 2 minutes to disappear into the growing darkness. Sarah ran as she had never run before, her lungs burning, her bare feet finding purchase on the familiar ground. She reached the creek bed and plunged into the shadows beneath its overhang, following its winding course away from the property. Hoofbeats thundered in the distance as the men organized their pursuit. Lanterns bobbed like fireflies against the darkening sky. Sarah pressed on, using the dry creek as cover, moving as quickly as she dared in the fading light. An hour into her flight, a hand reached from the shadows, covering her mouth before she could scream. She fought instinctively until a familiar voice whispered, "Sarah, it's me." Relief flooded through her as Kitchi pulled her deeper into a crevice in the creek bank. "They're searching for me," she gasped. "Thomas, Charles, all of them." "I know." Watched from hills. Kitchi's face was grim in the starlight. "Men at cabin. Men on horses. Bad situation." Quickly, Sarah explained about the silver, the forged document, the brothers' plan. "Thomas threatens you at spring," Kitchi concluded. "Men waiting to ambush me." Sarah nodded. "I couldn't warn you." "Come." Kitchi took her hand. No safe place. They traveled through the night, Kitchi leading with unerring confidence despite the darkness. He moved them away from obvious trails, sometimes backtracking or creating false signs of passage. By dawn, they had reached a series of rocky cliffs Sarah had never seen before, though they couldn't have been more than 5 miles from her property. "Up," Kitchi directed, indicating a nearly invisible path winding between boulders. The climb was treacherous, but Kitchy's strong hand steadied her at difficult passages. Near the top, he guided her through a narrow fissure in the rock face, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through sideways. The fissure opened into a cave, a deep natural chamber with a small opening in the ceiling that allowed light and ventilation. The space was surprisingly homey, with a fire pit, sleeping pallet, and shelves carved into the rock walls holding Kitchy's few possessions. "My place," he said simply. "No white man knows." Sarah sank onto a woven mat, exhaustion finally overtaking her. "It's perfect." Kitchy built a small fire, careful to keep the smoke minimal. He produced dried meat and a water skin, offering both to Sarah. "Eat, then sleep. Safe here." "For how long?" Sarah asked, the weight of their situation settling on her shoulders. "They won't stop looking. The silver." "Silver makes men crazy," Kitchy agreed. "But desert bigger than their greed. Can hide long time." "I can't hide forever, Kitchy. That land is legally mine." Sarah removed the metal box from her pocket. "I have the deed right here." Kitchy studied the document when she showed it to him. "Law on your side. But Thomas has guns, men. And my husband." The word tasted bitter now. Charles was supposed to be reformed, repentant. It was all lies. "Men show true face when wealth calls," Kitchy said. "Old Apache wisdom." They fell silent, the small fire casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. Despite her exhaustion, Sarah's mind raced with questions. Will they search this far out? Maybe. Not find cave. Kitchy added a small branch to the fire. "Tomorrow we plan. Tonight, rest." As Sarah settled onto the sleeping pallet Kitchy had prepared for her, she noticed small details about the cave. Marks on the walls that might be calendar notations, a collection of smooth stones similar to the healing stone he had given her, a worn Army Scout's jacket hanging from a wooden peg. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. "Since leaving Army. 3 summers." Kitchy arranged his own bedding on the opposite side of the fire. "Good place to think. Decide who to be after old life ends." The parallel to her own situation struck Sarah forcefully. She too was at a crossing point. Her old life effectively ended, the future uncertain. "And who did you decide to be?" she asked softly. Kitchy's eyes reflected the firelight. "Still deciding. Every day." As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah's last conscious thought was that perhaps she was still deciding too, and that for the first time since Charles's arrest, the decision felt entirely her own. 3 days passed in the sanctuary of Kitchy's cave. From this vantage point, they could observe the search parties combing the desert below. Thomas leading one group, Charles another, methodically covering the terrain in expanding circles from the homestead. "They're persistent," Sarah observed on the morning of the 4th day. "Silver makes them blind," Kitchy replied. "See only wealth, not danger." Indeed, the searchers seemed oblivious to the hazards of the desert in high summer, conserving neither water nor energy as they pushed their horses through the heat. "We can't stay here forever," Sarah said. The original deed spread before her on a flat stone. "This proves the land is mine, but it means nothing if I can't assert my claim." Kitchy nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Need sheriff. Law. Sheriff Garrett is one man. Thomas has at least 6 hired guns. Town has more men. Good men who follow law, not Thomas." Kitchy's logic was simple but compelling. Need to show truth to all, not just sheriff. By midday they had formulated a plan. Using charcoal from the fire, Sarah wrote a detailed account of the brothers' scheme on the back of her original deed, including Thomas's discovery of silver and the attempted forgery. Tomorrow, Kitchy decided. Search parties tired, frustrated. Good time. They descended from the cliffs under cover of darkness, making their way toward town rather than the homestead. Tucson slept as they slipped through its quiet streets, avoiding the occasional lantern-carrying watchman. Sheriff Garrett's office sat dark and empty, but his home, a modest house at the edge of town, showed a light in one window. "Wait here," Sarah whispered, approaching the door alone. Sheriff Garrett answered her knock with a pistol in hand, his expression shifting from wariness to shock. "Mrs. Blackwood? We've had search parties looking for you for days." "I know. May I come in?" Inside, Sarah presented her original deed and explained the entire situation. The silver discovery, the brothers' plot, their attempt to force her to sign over the property. "That's a serious accusation," Garrett said, studying the document. "But it explains a few things. Thomas has been gathering men, making wild claims about you being kidnapped by your Apache friend. Kitchi saved me from them, not the other way around." Garrett paced his small parlor. "The problem is evidence. It's your word against theirs, and Thomas has influence with certain people in town." From the shadows outside, Kitchi emerged, causing Garrett to reach for his pistol again before recognition dawned. "I remember you," the sheriff said. "The Army Scout." Kitchi nodded once in acknowledgement. "Sheriff," Sarah pressed, "Thomas showed me the silver ore himself. He admitted everything, thinking I had no choice but to sign his forged document." "And the ore sample? Where is it now?" "Still with Thomas, I imagine." Garrett considered this. "If we could catch them in the act, with the forged document and the ore sample." "They'll be at my homestead," Sarah said confidently. "Thomas won't abandon his claim to the silver." By dawn, Sheriff Garrett had assembled a small posse: the town doctor, the blacksmith, 2 ranchers known for their honesty, and the telegraph operator who doubled as a notary. As they approached Sarah's property, Kitchi scouted ahead, returning with news that confirmed Sarah's prediction. "Brothers there. 5 other men. Digging already started near creek bed." Garrett addressed his posse. "Remember, we're here to uphold the law, not start a gunfight. Mrs. Blackwood has legal ownership of this land. Any mining operation without her consent is trespassing and theft." The confrontation erupted the moment they crested the final rise overlooking the homestead. Thomas's men scrambled for weapons while Charles emerged from the cabin, papers clutched in his hand. "Sheriff, thank God you found her," Charles called, his performance flawless. "My wife has been abducted by—" "Save it, Blackwood," Garrett interrupted. "Mrs. Blackwood has explained everything. The silver, the forged deed, all of it." Thomas appeared from the direction of the creek bed, his shirt stained with dirt, a leather pouch swinging from his belt that Sarah recognized as containing ore samples. "This is a private family matter, Sheriff," Thomas began. "Mining on another's property without permission is a criminal matter," Garrett countered, nodding toward the fresh excavation visible near the creek. "As is forgery and attempted fraud." One of Thomas's men, Hayes, raised his rifle. "We outnumber you, Sheriff." "Perhaps," Garrett replied calmly, "but the law doesn't count numbers, only facts. And the fact is, Mrs. Blackwood holds legal title to this land, as witnessed and notarized." He gestured to the telegraph operator, who produced an official-looking document. "I've filed her complaint and registered her original deed with the territorial authority," the notary confirmed. "Any claim to the contrary would require court proceedings." Charles, seeing the situation deteriorating, attempted to salvage what he could. "There's been a misunderstanding. We merely intended to develop the property for Sarah's benefit." "Then you won't mind showing us the document you're holding," Garrett suggested. Charles hesitated, then slowly extended the forged deed. "And the silver samples?" Garrett asked, turning to Thomas. Thomas's hand moved to the pouch at his belt, then to his gun. "This is my discovery, my investment. On my land," Sarah stated firmly, stepping forward. "Worked by my hands when everyone else, including my husband, abandoned it." The standoff balanced on a knife's edge. Thomas calculating odds, Hayes with his finger on the trigger, the posse tense but steady. In the breathless moment between decision and disaster, it was Charles who finally broke. "Put down your weapons," he ordered the hired men. "It's over." Thomas rounded on his brother in fury. "You spineless!" "Enough!" Charles's prison-hardened voice cracked like a whip. "I've lost 3 years of my life to prison. I won't lose what remains to your greed." Autumn painted the desert in subtle golds and russets as Sarah surveyed her transformed homestead. 3 months had passed since the confrontation. Thomas awaited trial in Tucson for fraud and attempted theft. Charles, while avoiding additional charges due to his last-minute change of heart, had left the territory, heading to California with a letter of introduction from Sheriff Garrett to a doctor in need of an assistant. The silver mine operated under Sarah's oversight, with a fair agreement benefiting both her and the miners she had hired from town. The first profits had been used to expand her garden and dig a proper well that wouldn't run dry in summer. "New plants growing well," Kitchi observed, kneeling beside the unusual garden that now flourished beside the cabin. European vegetables interspersed with native desert plants he had introduced. "The corn is from your seeds," Sarah replied, pride evident in her voice. "And the squash has never grown so large." Their relationship had evolved with the changing landscape. Kitchi no longer disappeared at dusk, though he maintained his cave dwelling as a retreat. The town's attitude had shifted too, grudging respect replacing suspicion as Sarah's mind provided jobs and her medical knowledge, enhanced by Kitchi's herbal wisdom, filled the gap left by her husband's disgrace. "Mrs. Patterson brought her youngest for cough medicine yesterday," Sarah said, adjusting her broad-brimmed hat against the sun. "She actually thanked you for the creosote remedy." Kitchi's rare smile appeared briefly. "Desert provides. If people learn to see." They worked in companionable silence, harvesting the last of the summer crops. The routine they had developed felt natural now, his strength complementing her precision, her planning balancing his instinctive knowledge of the land. "Sheriff visits tomorrow," Kitchi remarked, more statement than question. Sarah nodded. "The final paperwork for the mining claim. And," she hesitated, "Charles's divorce petition has been granted." Kitchi absorbed this information without visible reaction, though his hands stilled momentarily on the plant he was tending. "Good news?" he asked carefully. "Yes," Sarah replied simply. "Very good news." The implications of that exchange hung in the air between them, unrushed and unhurried as the desert itself. Their relationship had never been defined by conventional boundaries. It would evolve in its own time. As evening approached, Sarah noticed 2 figures on horseback approaching from town, visitors on the road that now saw regular traffic to and from the mine. "Dr. Williams and his wife," she identified them, shading her eyes. "Probably coming to discuss the clinic." The territorial doctor had approached Sarah about establishing a small medical facility on her property, recognizing the unique combination of her training and Kitchi's traditional knowledge. The proposal represented everything she had once dreamed of with Charles, now possible on her own terms. "You build new life," Kitchi observed. "Strong roots now." Sarah's hand found his, work-roughened fingers intertwining. "We build," she corrected gently. As they walked together to greet their visitors, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From desperate survival to hard-won prosperity, from reluctant allies to something much deeper. The desert that had once seemed a punishment had become their shared home, harsh but honest, demanding but rewarding to those who understood its ways. Behind them, the garden thrived. European rows intersecting with Apache circular plantings, creating something new and stronger than either tradition alone could produce. Like them, it had found a way to flourish in the desert heat.